Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today's July the 24th, 205th day of the year. 160 days remain to the year's over with. Holidays and observances. National Tell an Old Joke Day. National Tequila Day. National Drive-Thru Day. National Cousins Day. Spend a day playing with your cousins. The chatting about this and that and life and playing games and gossiping about the family, and they live far away, write them a letter. You know, having grown up in Arkansas, and at least a lot of family from Arkansas, it was interesting to note that you went to family reunions in many cases to find dates. All right, International Self-Care Day, Samaritans Awareness Day, Pioneer Day. Learned about a Christian denomination group that pioneered their way to Salt Lake City and began as a divinely restored church known as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. National Amelia Earhart Day. You know, they keep saying they found her plane and they found her body and they found this and they found that, but nobody ever shows anything. National Refreshment Day. Earth Overshoot Day. Symbolizes humanity's responsibility and reflects the urgency to restore balance by valuing and preserving Earth's resources. National Day of Motoring. National Thermal Engineering Day. National Zookeeper Week. Zookeepers are dedicated professionals caring for exotic animals. Comic-Con begins today and goes through Sunday, July 27th. It's a big, colorful event where fans of comics and movies and games and shows all get together. It's loud and exciting. You know, big studios roll out new trailers at these events, but the center of it all is the crowd, of course. Everybody's there for the same reason. It's dressed for comfort and fun. And bring money. Gentse Feenstein, which is a Ghent, Belgium festival. Galway International Arts Festival, which of course is the big art festival in Ireland. Darwin Show Day goes on to the 26th. It's an annual event celebrating agriculture and local talent and community spirit in the Northern Territory. The features exhibits and competitions, entertainment, and has visitors from all over the Darwin Showgrounds. A lot of fun activities, exhibitions, and competitions during this event. Royal Welsh Show. Tour de France. Festival of British Archaeology. Big Butterfly Count. National Moth Week. National Parenting Gifted Children Week. Everybody Deserves a Massage Week. Speaking of people born in this state, Jennifer Lopez, who just had a interesting occurrence on the internet. Elizabeth Moss, Amelia Earhart was born on this date, Anna Paquin, and Rose Byrne. All right, let's see what we have in the way of news for today. Tulsi Gabbard has given a major update on the DOJ's role in investigating the Trump-Russia collusion hoax. What they were saying yesterday is the evidence is very clear. This whole thing was cooked up by Hillary Clinton and picked up and run with by Barack Obama. Well, Kohlberger begins his life and death in prison. They say he will die in prison. He doesn't have any hope of parole. And my guess is one of the other inmates is going to take him out. Well, the president is touring a $2.5 billion renovated federal building as Powell, who is currently the Fed chair, Jerome Powell, may well face perjury charges. Federal Reserve headquarters in Washington, D.C. has been given a major renovation, $2.5 billion renovation. Some administration officials have argued the massive renovations were a waste of taxpayer dollars and could even amount to a fireable offense by Powell. Meanwhile, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has noted that Powell's term may end in May 2026, which may do away with the need to fire him. Well, next, Biden Chief of Staff Ron Klain is facing grilling in the House GOP's cover-up probe. He's the sixth former Biden administration aide to appear for Representative Comer's probe, and what was known and when it was known about Biden's decline. As Chief of Staff, certainly, if anybody would know, it would be expected he'd know. Well, a lot of leftists are believing that Tulsi Gabbard is making all this stuff up about issues with the 2016 election. They call it revisionist history. But if in fact all this business about the Russia hoax was created to try to help Hillary Clinton win, that could well be a major issue. Well, the House is going to vote on censoring Democratic representative charged in the ICE facility incident. Representative Monica McIver allegedly interfered with federal officers at an immigration facility. Representative Clay Higgins has introduced a censure resolution against her. She's already been federally indicted for obstructing Homeland Security agents at an immigration facility in May. McIver's response is he's just a bigot who wants to hold back moving ahead. Well, Wisconsin graduate student Elliot Hines, who went missing, has been found dead in the Mississippi. She disappeared off the waterfront. Her body was found in the river after a 4-day search, more than a dozen miles from where she was last seen. And she's a gorgeous young lady. She was walking home from Bronco's Bar across Wisconsin at about 2:30 in the morning on Sunday. Last seen walking along the Mississippi River waterfront at about 3:30. Later spotted on surveillance footage walking in the direction of her apartment, which was about 3/4 of a mile away. Body's found in the river just before 10:30 a.m. local time Wednesday near Brownsville, Minnesota. Her cell phone was found by her friends during the search, according to her mother. Nobody seems to be able to figure out what happened during that 3/4 of a mile. Well, Joy Behar never knows when to shut up. White House has warned The View could be canceled next after Behar's anti-Trump rant. She said Obama's everything Trump is not. Trim, smart, handsome, happily married. Yes, that's why there's been all the talk about him getting a divorce. White House spokesperson warned The View co-host Joy Behar her show could be the next on the chopping block after her latest tirade. During the show, Behar and her fellow host responded to Trump's call from President Obama to be criminally investigated for allegedly manufacturing intelligence that prompted the Trump-Russia collusion narrative. And Behar went on a rant that Trump tried to overthrow the government on January 6th. She claimed that Trump is just jealous of Obama because Obama's everything he's not. Well, if you wondered whatever happened to Kevin Sorbo, he was one of the first Hollywood canceled. He was interviewed and said he sees the industry dramatically shifting under Trump. He claims studios are now reaching out after years of rejection over his conservative Christian values. If you remember, Kevin Sorbo came to fame playing the Greek god, demigod Hercules in the hit show Hercules: The Legendary Journeys. Did it for 6 years, from 1995 to 1999. And during an interview with Fox News, he discussed how the political climate is shifting in Hollywood. He believes the industry is open to more conservative and Christian values because they're tired of losing out on millions of dollars. Well, Hotel Vibes coffee hack has raised eyebrows as experts warn of sleep quality risk. The trend is to offer a little luxury and morning convenience, but could actually hamper your sleep quality. Some people think waking up and smelling the coffee immediately is a good thing. Some experts say it's grounds for concern. Does anyone or would anyone put a small coffee maker in their bedroom like Nespresso Hotel Vibes? Well, when I get up, I wake up about 4 and get up about 6. And usually I'll make a cup of coffee. I've got a Keurig. Well, the House panel has directed the chairman to subpoena Bill and Hillary Clinton and the Epstein probe. If you remember, it was Bill Clinton in a green dress that was talked about, and a big picture hanging on the wall of Epstein's. House panel Wednesday voted in favor of subpoenaing former President Clinton and his former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. Representative Scott Perry, Republican of Pennsylvania, offered a motion during a House Oversight Committee subcommittee hearing to call on committee chairman James Comer, Republican of Kentucky, to subpoena people with possible links to Ghislaine Maxwell. She's the imprisoned former associate of Jeffrey Epstein. I even heard a story the other day. There's evidence Epstein isn't dead. He's just been in hiding. So maybe we'll get all this over and done with. Russian plane carrying dozens of passengers crashes in the country's far east. Forensic crews located aircraft debris on a hillside near the Chinese border as officials talk about difficult weather conditions. It's an AN-24 passenger plane carrying almost reportedly crashed. Search crews found the plane's burning fuselage on a hillside south of its planned destination in the town of Tinda, located near the Russian border with China. Well, Powell's closed-door Fed meetings sparking a lawsuit in the Arizona Capitol. Public deserves to know exactly what their government officials are up to. It also seeks to temporarily bar the Fed from closing its upcoming FOMC meeting to the public. If whatever they're doing is so secret the public can't know, we got a real problem with that. Well, Sean Hannity's been talking about the Russia hoax and how it all came about. He says this makes Watergate look like a walk in the park. And that may well be true. Well, still with Colbert, he had left-wing journalists and hosts on The Late Show more than 200 times. Anderson Cooper, Jake Tapper, Richard Maddow, among the more frequent guests on the liberal late-night show. And he just can't figure out why it's being canceled. He gets $20 million a year to talk to his buddies on camera in a show that costs $100 million a year to do. Oh yeah, no way in the world that anything was confused about that. Far left politics of the Late Show and facing scrutiny after CBS announced last week it was pulling the plug on the Colbert's program. It's going to wrap up in May of next year. Well, Jimmy Buffett's widow is fighting with the trustee over the $275 million trust her husband Jimmy Buffett left. She wants Jane Buffett's demanding the removal of co-trustee Richard Bazenter from the marital trust. She wants full unrestricted access. And she'd go on a spending spree like you never saw. Well, Ozzy Osbourne just died at 76, surrounded by his family, including wife Sharon, with who shared decades of love and turbulence. He's been married for over 40 years before he died Tuesday, July 22nd, just 2 weeks after the couple celebrated their 43rd wedding anniversary. Ozzy was born John Michael Osbourne, December 3rd, 1948. Got the nickname the Prince of Darkness from his shadowy heavy metal persona. He was the front man for Black Sabbath, known as much for his valuable mark on the music industry as it was for his larger-than-life personality. Both on stage singing as well as filming the successful reality show The Osbournes. Now, Pam Bondi canceled an appearance at an anti-trafficking summit over a medical issue. She abruptly canceled her scheduled Wednesday appearance at the CPAC's anti-trafficking summit in Washington, citing her recovery from a health issue. She was expected to speak at the summit against human trafficking, and it was revealed she couldn't make her scheduled appearance. In the note that she sent, she said, "I'm sorry to miss all my CPAC friends today. Unfortunately, I'm recovering from a recently torn cornea, which is preventing me from being with you. Wish I was able to join you and support all the work being done on this critical issue." Well, the brother of late NFL hero Pat Tillman, if you'll remember, he was killed by friendly fire. He had enlisted, and he was on an operation when one of his own people shot him in the back. But his brother had undergone a mental competency hearing before an arson trial. Richard Tillman was arrested on Sunday morning. His younger brother, the late NFL hero Pat Tillman, appeared in a California courtroom Wednesday as questions rose about whether he'd be mentally capable of standing trial. He crashed into a San Jose post office Sunday morning, arrested on suspicion of arson and vandalism. The post office in a strip mall in Santa Clara County, California. He crashed into it about 3 o'clock in the morning. It took 50 firefighters an hour and a half to put out the flames. That's according to NBC in the Bay Area. In the courtroom, he spoke out loud multiple times, said he was competent, didn't need bail, and his attorney was no longer his lawyer. His attorney declared a doubt for Tillman to stand trial, and no plea was entered. Bail is set for $136,000. He's due back in court in August, when the court will assign doctors to assess his competency. Another brother, Kevin Tillman, said Richard was live streaming what I'll call his altered self on social media, which occurred during the crash. Richard told police at the scene of the crash, which set the post office on fire after the car crashed into it, he was live streaming it. Well, we'll see how that plays out. Comedian Michael Rappaport mocked New York City mayoral candidate Mamdani as Zoran the Moron. The comedian refuses to let Democratic Socialists drive him from his home in New York City if he wins the mayoral race. We lived there for 3 years. It was a lot of crazy people in that town. Well, according to a Fox News poll, approval of the Supreme Court is at a 5-year high, rebounding from a record low in 2024. Voters are more likely to say the court's too conservative rather than too liberal. But at the end of the 24-25 term, voters have a more positive view of the Supreme Court. 47% of voters approve the job the Supreme Court's doing. It's a 9-point jump since last July when a record low of 38 approved. The increase in approval is widespread, especially among independents, up 16 points, up 15 points among women, and 14 points among Republicans. And voters under the age of 30, it's up 12 points. Now, Megan Maroney makes waves in a blue bikini and a cross necklace during a summer boat day. She's known for the song Tennessee Orange. She calls touring with Kenny Chesney the best summer she's ever spent. She's 27 years old. Posted a carousel of pictures to Instagram featuring her own stage performing as well as photos of her fans in the stands and her friends. And a very fetching photo of her in a bikini sitting on a boat. Well, let's see. Well, after all the brouhaha raised by the first drug user's son, Hunter Biden, that his father had issues because he took Ambien, there has been public discussion about some of the drug's cognitive effects. Ambien is not recommended for people in certain occupations, according to doctors. Hunter Biden alleged the sleeping pills could actually contribute to his father's apparent cognitive struggles during his first presidential debate in 2024. He said he's 81 years old. He's tired. They gave him Ambien to be able to sleep. Gets up on stage and looks like he's a deer in the headlights. Well, Ambien, the generic name is Zolpidem. It's a prescription medication for insomnia. It's only intended for short-term use. That's according to GoodRx. And some of the more serious and rare side effects include hallucinations, abnormal thinking and behavior, and possible increased risk of dementia in older adults. And they gave it to an 81-year-old man. Well, according to reporter and author Selena Zito, who wrote a telltale book about the attempt to assassinate President Trump. She said for the guy supposed to answer the 3 a.m. phone calls, giving him Ambien is just absolutely bizarre. She said she couldn't imagine any doctor prescribing that to a president. She don't know why it would have been a secret if it did. Now, let's see what else we got. Well, Trump is facing some what are being referred to as headwinds at this point. 58% of people oppose the new budget law. They don't understand it, but they oppose it. The economic outlook shows an uptick because of it. A Democratic, pro-Israel Democratic elected official says those who want to decry the Hamas October 7th attack have no business posing as humanitarians. Representative Richie Torres, Democrat of New York, criticized the Democratic Party's far-left stance and warned that the resistance side could push out any efforts for party reform. He's an outspoken opponent of anti-Semitism, as you might guess. Saudi Arabia makes a move toward Russia despite the threatened Trump sanctions. Democratic Senator Fetterman is opposing cashless stores. He defends Main Street and working class Americans. They push to ban cashless businesses, protects unbanked households and small business owners from digital discrimination. A lot of folks still, this day and time, don't have bank accounts. They use cash and debit cards. Well, Trump's executive order targeting birthright citizenship has been blocked again. One of God's anointed says it's unconstitutional. And this was an interesting story. The Tower of London dig revealed Black Death era skeletons just below that popular tourist site. And the archaeologists are saying this is the tip of the iceberg. Apparently, the Black Death has been far more widespread than history reports. Historic Royal Palaces, the organization that manages Tower of London, shared the news with Fox News Digital. Those discoveries were made during an excavation in the spring, marking the first dig at the Tower of London in over 30 years. Took place just ahead of a scheduled renovation of the Church of St. Peter in Advincula chapel that dates back to the 15th century. Its final resting place of many who lived or were imprisoned within the tower walls, including 3 queens, 2 Catholic saints. And the church undoubtedly has a few stories to tell, but a lot of that early history is hidden. All right. See if there's anything else of interest. Well, Iran's intensifying the pressure on Jewish communities amid a crackdown after Israeli airstrikes. Depending on, if you listen to the stories here, you get one picture. Listen to a feed out of the Middle East, you get another picture. And finally, socialist New York City mayoral candidate Mandami is on a Uganda trip. 10-day trip overseas this summer. He's in an election campaign. He's going to leave the country for 10 days. Well, Uganda is where he was born. So it may make some kind of sense. All right, let's talk about our stories for today. Now, we've been talking about a lot of bizarre and off-the-wall stories. A lot of little-known events in history. Maybe there we go. You know, there's been a lot of questions why it took so long to react to the 9/11 threat when those planes hit the Twin Towers. On September 11, 2001, the National Reconnaissance Office in Chantilly, Virginia was preparing for a scheduled emergency response drill. And what was the scenario that drill was going to run? A corporate jet would accidentally crash into one of the NRO's towers due to mechanical failure. That exercise, according to internal memos that have come to light, was set to simulate the emergency response to such an event, which would include evacuations, communication procedures, and coordination with external agencies. But at the very moment that drill was getting ready to get underway, two hijacked commercial airliners are already in the air and heading toward the World Trade Center. It was 8:46 a.m. when American Airlines Flight 11 slammed into the North Tower, and the simulation at the National Reconnaissance Office was still underway. So how do you tell between what's real and what's a simulation? 17 minutes later at 9:03 a.m., United Airlines Flight 175 hit the South Tower. I mean, these crashes were very real, but they mirrored the fictional emergency scenario running just outside of Washington. You know, the drill was shut down shortly after the second tower was hit. The unbelievable timing has remained one of the most eyebrow-raising footnotes in the story of 9/11. It wasn't just the fact a plane crash scenario was playing out in real time, it was where it was happening. Inside one of America's most secretive intelligence organizations. Now, not a lot of folks know about the National Reconnaissance Office. It's responsible for designing, building, and operating the U.S.'s spy satellites. One of the most classified arms of the U.S. intelligence community. It operates jointly with the Department of Defense and other agencies. Founded in 1961. And nobody even knew it existed until 1992. By 2001, the agency employed over 3,000 people and operated under extreme secrecy. Now, as I said, it's located in Chantilly, Virginia, just 4 miles from Dulles International Airport. And the building is rather nondescript on the outside. It has tight access control and multiple security layers. On the morning of 9/11, most NRO personnel were not inside the building. According to the NRO spokesperson, Art Hudnall, only essential personnel were there because the drill required evacuating non-essential staff to test emergency procedures. Now, as you might guess, this exercise had been planned months in advance and was scheduled for just one single day, September 11th. Now, the drill wasn't disclosed to the public until nearly a year later when it was revealed in a little noticed report from the Department of Transportation's Office of Inspector General, released in August of 2002. It was titled Audit of the Federal Aviation Administration's Use of the Office of National Drug Control Policy's PulseNet system. And there was an appendix mentioning that a simulated exercise involving a plane crash was conducted at the NRO on 9/11. Well, of course, the media jumped on that. NRO confirmed the drill through its public affairs office. In a statement to CNN, that bastion of truth, in August of 2002, NRO spokesperson said it's just a bizarre coincidence. Had nothing to do with any intelligence, threat, or anything else. It was just purely a coincidence. Despite these clarifications, the application of such a perfectly timed coincidence stirred deep concern among researchers, journalists, and even some intelligence professionals. One of the individuals present during the drill later described the nature of the moment. An anonymous NRO contractor, who was quoted in a private intelligence study on 9/11, said, "We're all gathered to run through the crash scenario. Somebody came running in telling us to turn on the TV. Others have noted how that exercise could have hampered real-time responses. And since the scenario involved a plane crash, initial news of an actual crash at the World Trade Center was, according to one NRO official, met with confusion. People initially thought it was part of the drill. Only after we saw the second plane hit live on TV, it really sank in. That's when we shut the exercise down." Well, this confusion wasn't limited just to NRO. NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, is also conducting drills on the morning of 9/11, as were a number of other federal agencies. Apparently, this particular day was full of simulations and contributing to the widespread uncertainty in the early minutes of the attack. Now, the NRO exercise wasn't the only drill running that day, as I said. NORAD was running Vigilant Guardian, a military exercise involving simulated hijacked planes. FEMA was in New York City for an emergency response drill scheduled to begin the following day. FEMA can't show up and pay people who've been destroyed by floods and what have you, but they can show up to do a simulation. And the CIA and some other agencies were engaged in unrelated training operations. Now, these overlapping drills created a day so dense with simulations that, as a former White House counterterrorism advisor Richard Clarke later said, it became hard to tell what was real and what was just an exercise. Now, to some, these coincidences suggest a lack of coordination. To others, they raise uncomfortable questions about how deeply penetrated U.S. security systems might be. By 2001. Now, despite being verified by the NRO itself, covered in major outlets like CNN and the Associated Press, the details of this simulation remain almost entirely unknown to the general public. It wasn't highlighted in the official 9/11 Commission report, and it wasn't investigated further by major congressional inquiries. Now, part of the reason may be bureaucratic obscurity. The NRO's role in satellite surveillance doesn't intersect directly with aviation security. And the other reason may be simply a psychological reason. The idea that one of the most secretive U.S. agencies simulated a plane crash at the exact time real planes were being used as weapons is, frankly, too unbelievable to process. So, of course, in typical government fashion, it got buried. The NRO's 9/11 drill is not evidence of conspiracy, but it is evidence of how strange reality can be. It's one of the most catastrophic days in modern history, and the line between simulation and reality blurred for a moment. And that moment has never been fully explored. It remains a powerful example of how even the best prepared systems can find themselves outpaced by chaos. And the question still lingers as why the drill happened. And why decades later, so few people know about it. Now, if you want more information about it, you can go to CNN, that bastion of truth. They talk about the agency planned exercise on September 11, built around a plane crashing into a building. That was can be found on the internet, August 22nd, 2002. https edition.cnn.com. Then there's U.S. Department of Transportation Office of Inspector General report from 2002. And from the Associated Press, story from August 22nd, 2002, coincidence or clue? 9/11 simulation was planned for that same morning, and at really almost that same time. And the 9/11 Commission report, 2004, now it doesn't mention the NRO drill, but it does talk about a number of other things. Then you got Michael Rupert, did a book called Crossing the Rubicon, Decline of the American Empire to End of the Age of Oil. And Richard Clarke, Against All Enemies, Inside America's War on Terror. That came out in 2004. Now, a few other things you might consider. This falls very neatly underneath Operation Northwood, talking about false flag operations. And a lot of people thought it was a false flag operation. Well, let's talk about the price of progress. In the age before medical consent, there was property. And in the American South, that property bled. Throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, black bodies, enslaved, voiceless, and commodified, became tools in the rise of American medicine. They weren't patients, they weren't volunteers, they were just used, cut open, operated on, tested, observed, and then discarded. Their suffering laid the foundation for many of the practices, discoveries, and reputations that would define modern medicine. But their names, when they were recorded at all, were often reduced to either first names or property numbers, buried under hospital logs, plantation ledgers, or scientific papers never sought to honor their humanity. For example, Dr. J. Marion Sims is still remembered in some circles as a pioneer, the father of modern gynecology. But his legacy is carved into the broken bodies of the women he experimented on over and over again without any anesthesia or consent. Between 1845 and 1849, he conducted dozens of operations on enslaved women in Montgomery, Alabama, in a small backyard hospital behind his home. And these women, including three whose name did survive, Anarcha, Lucy, and Betsy, were forced to undergo excruciating vaginal surgeries as he attempted to develop a surgical cure for vesicovaginal fistulas, a complication of childbirth. Anarcha was operated on at least 30 times. Lucy nearly died from sepsis after Sims inserted a sponge into her bladder in an early surgical attempt. And Betsy was subjected to repeated procedures without any relief. Well, he justified his refusal to use anesthesia by claiming that enslaved black women didn't experience pain like white women. That was a racist pseudoscience that permeated 19th century medical thought and allowed doctors to rationalize the brutality as treatment. In his own memoir, he wrote that the women clamored to be treated, a claim that has been widely discredited. Historian Harriet Washington, in her book Medical Apartheid, argues that these accounts were sanitized to protect Sims' reputation and obscure the deeply coercive nature of the experiments. Now, while Sims was the most infamous figure, he wasn't alone. Across the southern United States, plantation infirmaries and slave hospitals are used as unofficial experimental laboratories. Hospital records from Louisiana and South Carolina show numerous procedures conducted on enslaved people, from amputations to crude vaccinations, often with experimental or untested drugs. Medical schools in Georgia, Virginia, and Maryland routinely used enslaved cadavers for anatomical dissections, sometimes even instructing students to practice on living bodies. And pharmaceutical testing was also quietly performed on slave populations. Quinine trials for malaria, mercury-based compounds for syphilis, and other dangerous remedies were administered in various dosages with no concern for the risk or long-term consequences. And these experiments are almost never recorded in full. Instead, sanitized versions were written for academic journals with language that erased the conditions under which the trials are performed. Hospital logs use euphemisms like colored female, age unknown, or omitted race and status altogether. When death did occur, it was often blamed on underlying weakness or fever or natural causes. Rarely did anybody bother to report the obvious cause of the death. They died from being used. Well, though there are few first-person accounts from enslaved individuals in medical settings that did survive, fragments of truth exist in personal letters and court records and abolitionist writings. In an 1858 testimony, one former enslaved man said they made us lay still while they cut us. We couldn't scream. If we screamed, we were beaten afterward. Sometimes they said it was for learning, and other times they said nothing at all. Another account, recorded by abolitionist physician Dr. James McCune Smith, described a southern hospital where enslaved women were routinely used to test new birth control methods. According to what he wrote, the cruelty disguised as curiosity is the most chilling of all. These men claim to heal while they destroy. And Dr. Smith, one of the first black American physicians trained in Europe, openly criticize the medical establishment's use of enslaved bodies and argued that the knowledge gleaned from them was built on stolen lives. Well, even in the 20th century, medical institutions that benefited from these practices rarely acknowledged the truth. Statues of J. Marion Sims are erected in New York Central Park outside the South Carolina State House. His techniques were praised in gynecological texts well into the 1900s. It's only in recent years, due to pressures from activists and scholars and descendants, that these monuments began to come down. Sims Central Park statue was removed in 2018, but the broader legacy remains unaddressed. Today, distrust in the medical system among black Americans is retraced back in part to this legacy of exploitation. The memory of pain without consent, passed down through generations, and not just history, it's trauma that lingers. The advancement of American medicine can't be told honestly without acknowledging its dark roots. Progress was often not the result of genius alone, but of forced sacrifice. Anarcha, Lucy, Betsy, their names, once nearly erased, now stand as solemn reminders that the line between medicine and cruelty is one drawn by ethics, and all too often that line is crossed. The suffering wasn't necessary, but it was given anyway. Now, if you want to get more information on this, Harriet Washington wrote a book called Medical Apartheid, The Dark History of Medical Experimentation on Black Americans from Colonial Times to the Present. Came out in 2006. J. Marion Sims, The Story of My Life, came out in 1883. Edward Cooper Owens, Medical Bondage, Race, Gender, and the Origins of American Gynecology, came out in 2017. Then there's a story in the New York Times from April 17, 2018, about the statue of Dr. J. Marion Sims being removed from Central Park. Washington Post story, enslaved women were medical test subjects. Now they're remembered, dated March 2017. American Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology Archives, historical essays and medical records. And Dr. James McCune Smith, essays on American medical ethics from the 1840s. Well, let's turn to another secret. The Klerksdorp spears. Now, this story began in Hudnall, South Africa. Buried deep beneath the earth in the pyrophyllite-rich mines in the Wonderstone region, workers began uncovering strange objects in the 1970s. Perfectly round metallic spears, often no larger than golf balls, began to appear inside rock formations dated to nearly 3 billion years old. Now, these weren't random chunks of mineral or accidental nodules. They were perfectly shaped, sometimes with perfectly parallel grooves that surround their circumference. They appeared to be machined. Geologists were baffled. The rock formations where they were found were part of the Precambrian era, long before any known complex life on Earth appeared. But these spears seemed intentional. And to this day, this mystery has never been solved. These spears were named after the nearby town of Klerksdorp. They range from about 1 to 10 centimeters in diameter. Both are made from hematite or goethite, or a composite of metal-rich material. And they fall into two categories: groove spears that feature fine concentric grooves running around the equator, symmetrical and evenly spaced, or they're smooth spears, often polished looking with a fine metallic sheen and remarkable roundness. These spears are perfectly balanced. According to one museum curator in Hudnall, South Africa, if you rotate them on a flat surface, they don't wobble, as if they were created in a lathe. Well, of course, the official explanation from geologists is the spears are natural concretions formed in volcanic sediment over millions of years. Much like other round formations, such as the Muckley marbles of Utah or the spherules found in other iron-rich sedimentary layers. In 1982, a study by Rolf Marx, then curator of the Museum of Klerksdorp, acknowledged their geological origin, but added something peculiar. In a letter widely circulated among researchers, he said the spears are a complete mystery. They're found in Precambrian rock, looking perfectly round with grooves around the center. No known natural process can explain the formation of these objects. Well, in an interview with a South African newspaper, Marx also noted some of the spears were stored in a vibration-free chamber. When the spears are rotated on its own axis, as if driven by an internal mechanism. Well, that claim, of course, was never published in the form of a journal, but it's been repeated by researchers and mystery seekers ever since. South African Council for Geoscience disagreed, though. Their position was the spears are nothing more than spherical concretions formed by the slow accumulation of mineral matter around a nucleus. They pointed to examples of similar formations in sedimentary rock around the world. But privately, some geologists admitted the grooves and uniformity were highly unusual and not typical of concretions. One unnamed mining geologist, interviewed in the 1990s, called them geological impossibilities that shouldn't be symmetrical, but they are. Well, unlike many geological curiosities, the Klerksdorp spears are embedded in rock, estimated to be over 2.8 to 3 billion years old. from a time when the Earth's atmosphere lacked oxygen and multicellular life didn't exist yet. So if these spheres are indeed natural, they challenge current understanding of how symmetry and surface patterning can occur in slow-forming materials. If they're artificial, it'd be among the oldest artifacts ever known on the Earth, and will rewrite the timeline of intelligent life on this Earth. There are no drill marks, no apparent tool residue, no explanation. They just are. And because most samples were recovered during routine mining, very few were properly preserved for lab analysis. And despite interest from fringe theorists and scientists alike, no comprehensive scientific studies have ever been conducted to explain how the sphere's symmetry and grooves could arise from geological forces alone. Well, if you want more information, there's a number of theories. The Klerksdorp spheres have fueled decades of speculation. Were they created by ancient aliens? Some suggest they were remnants of a prehistoric or extraterrestrial civilization that visited the Earth long before humans evolved. Does it show a prehistoric intelligence? Others wonder if they could have been created by an unknown early form of intelligent life, which has been lost to time. Or were they natural anomalies? A lot of scientists, in their ivory towers, argue for a geologic origin, but even then they admit these spheres are anomalously perfect. But no matter what the theory might be, one thing is undeniable. Nature almost never creates precision for no reason. The sphere's existence raises fundamental questions about how we understand the boundary between natural formation and deliberate design. The Klerksdorp spheres are locked in stone older than the continents themselves. And whether they're mysterious gifts from deep within the earth or relics of something old and forgotten, they do force us to confront the limits of our knowledge. Apparently, not every question has an answer. Some just sit quietly for 3 billion years waiting to be asked. Well, for more information, go to the South African Council for Geoscience public statements on the Klerksdorp spheres from 2002. Michael Cremo and Richard Thompson wrote a book called Forbidden Archaeology, The Hidden History of the Human Race from 1993. Rolf Marx, his personal correspondence and interviews from 1980 to 1984. Klerksdorp Museum Archives, there are field notes and samples on display. Select spheres are available to view. Then Linda Moulton Howe had the Earth File interviews and analysis in 1999. South African Geological Society had comparative studies on sedimentary concretions and pyrophyllite formations. And the Epoch Times in 2012 talked about 3 billion euro manufactured spheres. And finally, Smithsonian Magazine, A Natural History of Lockslick Design from 2017. Well, we talked yesterday about a Versailles time slip, which took place in August of 1901. 2 English women walked the grounds of a Petit Triomphe in Versailles. It was a simple visit to a historic palace garden, but their report was anything but simple. Both women were accomplished academics and educators, and they claimed they stepped, unintentionally of course, into the past. Well, when they got back to England, the 2 women conducted a detailed historical analysis of the grounds and attempted to verify what they'd seen. And certainly their findings were shocking. Several of the buildings and features they'd encountered didn't exist in 1901, but they did exist in the 1770s. And the clothing worn by the figures they described matched court dress from the late 1800s. And a woman they'd seen sitting with a sketch pad matched contemporary portraits of Marie Antoinette in her leisure clothing. One of the women, Jordan, returned to Versailles alone in January 1902 and tried to retrace her steps. She reported seeing more anachronistic figures, including a group of people in period clothing moving across the lawn. Well, in 1911, the two women published their experiences in a book titled An Adventure. They used pseudonyms because they were academics, written in academic tone, and presented a serious investigation of what they called a haunting or possibly a time slip. The book gained wide attention in both scholarly and paranormal circles. And while critics, of course, immediately accused the women of overinterpretation or wishful thinking, neither ever retracted one word they said or revised their account, and both continued to stand by their versions of events till they died. One of them died in 1937, the other one in 1924. Even in their private writings, there was never a hint of deception or regret. A lot of folks have attempted to explain the Versailles time slip. It's been called a mass hallucination, which is unlikely given their individual recollections and later confirmations. Maybe they walked into a historical reenactment, but there was none scheduled that day, and no actors present recording according to Versailles staff records. How about a psychological projection? Well, certainly that's possible, but it fails to account for the specificity and historical accuracy of the details they later uncovered. Well, some theorists said they encountered a residual haunting, a kind of psychic replay of the past. Others believe it's an example of a fold in time or dimensional overlap. And then there are those who just dismiss it as impossible. But for over 120 years, this story has refused to fade. The past is always beneath our feet. But what happens if sometimes it opens up like a trap door? Well, the account written by these two women challenges our understanding of time as a one-way street. Their experience was real. Time is not fixed, but layered, with moments from the past lingering like echoes in places where memory runs deep. Versailles is a palace built on history, revolution, and beauty, but on one quiet summer afternoon in 1901, two women apparently stepped through a crack in time and glimpsed a world long gone but not forgotten. Now, if you want more information on this, the book 1911, written in 1911, called An Adventure by Moberly and Jourdan, which has been republished numerous times, is a good place to start. Brian Inglis wrote The Hidden Power in 1986. Andrew Mackenzie wrote Adventures in Time, Encounters with the Past in 1997. Peter Banda wrote Time and Destiny in 1970. Society for Psychical Research did historical commentaries on An Adventure. The Telegraph wrote about a time slip at Versailles in 2001. And the BBC Archive, entitled Versailles Time Slip 2011, goes into some detail. And on that note, we come to the end of today's show. We'll be back tomorrow. And once again, we'll be talking about stories that are strangely unusual. Until then, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show, saying have a truly great evening.